Greetings! How is a cloudy sky like a crowned prince? Both are likely to rain. Little wordplay there. Why did I bring that up? I misspoke last week. I want to help us all understand a technicality. I spoke last week of some very tragic events in the history of God's church, particularly, of course, the Old Testament congregation, the house of Judah, particularly I was focusing on. And in the process of that, I've talked about Nebuchadnezzar, who was the instrument through which the first captivity took place. Now, he was king when he conquered Jerusalem back in 587 BC. But when he was still crowned prince, before he became king, he became king in 605. But in 606, as crowned prince, he had already invaded Judah. And you can read about that in the first chapter of Daniel. So from the Jewish point of view, he was the ruler of Babylon from their point of view. He was the one that they had been dealing with since 606 BC. So this is why when we come to 2 Kings 25, it is written this way. And in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, and we understand from other scriptures it goes all the way to the 10th, and the Jews fast on the 9th day of the 5th month most years, and when it's on a Sabbath, they will fast on the 10th, that Sunday. Are you with me so far? All right. And in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. This was in the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, because as I said, he had already invaded in 606 as crowned prince. But now, when they're in exile, and looking back on it, in Jeremiah 52, now the Jews are in exile. So as Jeremiah covers it, he's now keeping time according to the Babylonian reckoning, the Chaldean reckoning, the Neo-Chaldean Empire, Neo-Babylonian Empire, which is the empire of the Chaldeans, the empire of Nebuchadnezzar. And here we go to to Jeremiah 52 and verse 12. Did I say that it was the 19th year in 2 Kings? I think it continued that way. But let me see. Let me go back to 2 Kings 25, because that may be, I may have had it in reverse. Let's go back to 2 Kings 25. 2 Kings 25 and now it does mention it as the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar. And then in Jeremiah 52, again it mentions the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar. I'm going to Jeremiah 52 and verse 12. Now in the 5th month, on the 10th day of the month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard who served the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. But if we read a little bit later on, in verse 29 of that chapter, now we're dealing from the perspective of captives, okay? So originally, they were not captives. They became captives. Now, they had become a vassal state. There had been various interventions in their governmental system already. They had become a vassal state by 604, really. BC, they had become a subservient. But the actual conquest occurred in 587. But then 5 years later, Judea was wiped off the map entirely. But let's go to verse 29. In the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar, he carried away captive from Jerusalem 832 persons. And I think that the reason why here it says the 18th year is because now we're going by the official Babylonian reckoning, and that was in fact the 18th year of his reign, when he conquered Jerusalem, and the temple was destroyed, and the palace of the king, and so on. And then 5 years later, in the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, that's when the final wipeout occurs. So I hope that technicality has now been dealt with. Why we have an 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar in one place and then the 19th year in two other places. Now, if you want to study the history of the period I talked about last week, you see that it is covered in Jeremiah 52. You'll find it also in Jeremiah 39. And regarding the events of the fast of Gedaliah that I talked about last week, you can read about them in Jeremiah 40, 41, and 42. And regarding the 10th day, the 10th month, you can look at Ezekiel 24. And there are other passages in Ezekiel that tie in with the history I covered last week. So there's a lot of research you could still do if you want to dig into this history. And I will be talking about history today, but I'll also be talking about prophecy if I have any opportunity as time permits. Because today I want to give you a fall festival preview. I want to give you today a fall festival preview. Now, I know some of you would prefer the term autumn, but I like fall festival because of the alliteration. So let's call them the Autumn Festivals if you would like. There is a tremendous significance in these holy days. If you go to Acts 1 and the beginning of the church, devout people who kept the holy days, wanted to be in Jerusalem for Pentecost. Chag HaShavuot, the Festival of Weeks. Chag HaMishim Yom, the Festival of 50 Days, or Pentecost in the Greek, Americanized Greek. Pentecost meaning the 50th day. And so in Acts 2, when the day of Pentecost had fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. So they're there keeping the festival of Pentecost, and the church begins. And you notice in verse 5, and there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. And these were devout people. They were commandment-keeping people. And from that group came the church. And they didn't have to be taught the Bible. They knew the Bible. They had to be taught about Jesus Christ, which Peter did. And so they were baptized 3,000 that day. So from 120, it increases 25 times to 3,000. And you see, if you read the book of Acts, the holy days come up. And also in 1 Corinthians, the holy days come up. The holy days are an important part, really, of Christian living. And they were initially given to the children of Israel, but ultimately they will be observed worldwide by all ethnicities. And I want to go to Leviticus 23 and notice when God gives these appointed times, these Moadim, to the children of Israel. He says to them, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, this is verse 2 of Leviticus 23, the feast of the eternal, these are the Moadim, the appointed times, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations. These are my feasts. He begins with the weekly Sabbath, and then he goes to the annual appointed times. And when he finishes, in verse 44, so Moses declared to the children of Israel the feasts of the eternal. So these are God's festivals. Now, he gave them initially to the children of Israel. We understand from the New Testament that from a spiritual point of view, a Christian is spiritually speaking an Israelite. He's spiritually speaking a Jew. You could go to Galatians 6, Galatians 3. You could go to Romans, the 2nd chapter. Romans, the 11th chapter. The church, let's put it this way. When you become a Christian, you have a Greek theology and a Hebrew culture. That's kind of a summary of what's going on here. I want to talk about the holy days that are coming up this fall, the appointed times, the festivals coming up from three perspectives as I have the time. I want to start with the history, and then go on to how Jesus Christ's ministry is pictured in these days, and then finally the prophetic significance of these days. As I'm speaking to you, I don't know when you're going to hear this talk, but I'm speaking during the time of the Summer Olympics of 2021. They were postponed 1 year, and there's a story about a reporter who he thought he knew a lot about these athletes and what they were doing, and he saw this Olympic athlete approaching him, and he said to him, "Are you a pole vaulter?" And the fellow said, "No, I'm German, but how did you know my name?" Think about that a moment. Hopefully you'll get a kick out of that. I want to use a German term now, Heilsgeschichte, which is talking Heilsgeschichte, which is talking about the salvation history. Heilsgeschichte, as the German theologians came up with that term, salvation history. And when you read the Bible, you see the Bible is not just covering data, just for the sake of throwing out data, information, historical material, but overall, there's a story being told. There's a theme here. God is working out a plan of salvation for human beings, and He begins with a nation that was also His church initially. Maybe I should go to that verse. I hadn't planned necessarily, but I guess I had toyed with the idea. Let me go to Acts 7 and around verse 37. I'm going to go to verse 38. It talks about Moses' career in the wilderness with the people of Israel, and it says, 7:38, this is he who was in the congregation in the wilderness. I think the word is ecclesia there, and it's translated church in some Bibles. This is he who was in the church in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai, which of course really is Jesus Christ, and with the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, the Logos, God, the communicator of His will. This is he who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai, and with our fathers, the one who received the living oracles to give to us. So the people of Israel were a church. So when we study the history of Israel, we're studying church history, and we all have in effect our spiritual descendants, whatever our ethnicity, but all people, let's say Israelite and Gentile, they're nevertheless, spiritually speaking, the history of Israel is the history of God's church. And the holy days, the appointed times in Leviticus 23, point to some very important aspects, points of the history of ancient Israel, and therefore the history of the ancient church. So let's take a look at Leviticus 23 and verse 23. 23, because when I'm talking now, I'm focusing now on the festivals that are not far away from now. They're going to be upon us fairly soon. As I'm speaking, we're on the 22nd day of the 5th month, and the festivals begin on the first day of the 7th month on the sacred calendar, so it's not far off. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a Sabbath rest, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. So we have the 7th day of each week is the Sabbath, but now in the 7th month, the new year of the 7th month is also an annual day of rest, and it's a memorial of trumpeting, Yom Teruah, a day of trumpeting, and it's really a memorial of the creation of the world as we know it, the world of Adam and Eve. And so at that time, when God created the world, He was king, He was sovereign over the world, He created it. And so He has the right, in effect, to guide and direct where it's going. And He took a portion of it, of the world that He created, and gave it to His church, to His people, to the people of Israel. And there's a reason He did that. And His plan is going to be fulfilled as He guides and directs human history in such a way that the people of Israel will eventually be fully regathered to that land, and from there, having been reconciled to God through Jesus Christ, will influence the rest of humankind. That time is coming. So we see God as the creator of the world, and we see Him therefore as the one who is the ruler, the sovereign, the judge. And so trumpets are blown at the coronation of a king. And in fact, in Psalm 24, we see the beginning of creation week pictured here. Psalm 24 is the psalm that, according to historical records, was the psalm that the Levites recited each Sunday in the temple and in synagogues today Psalm 24 is the psalm for Sunday, and it talks about God as creator. The Psalm of David, the earth is the Eternal's and all its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters. When when the creation week is talked about in Genesis 1, we begin with an abyss. We begin with a world covered with water, and thick clouds covering the water. So that then God has to divide the water. The clouds rise, and so there's a firmament, and so on. And then again, of course, later, as the wickedness of the earth becomes overwhelming, he once again floods it out. But this time, he does preserve animal life and human life. So in the ark, so that much of life, on earth is destroyed. But we have the, Noah and his family, and we have the animals that were spared, and so on. So, but it's a similar new beginning, up from a flood. Well, we're not going to have that again, right? There's not going to be any more universal flood. That's a promise. So anyway, the Festival of Trumpets reminds us of God as creator. And of course, as creator, he is also sovereign, and he's also judge. And so the Festival of Trumpets, which is the beginning of the civil year, from year to year, is a time when judgment is going to be on people's minds as we begin a new civil year. This is a time to evaluate how we've done for the year. In Exodus 12, we see that Israel was counting time, autumn to autumn to autumn, autumn to autumn. But then God established a holy day cycle, so he developed an ecclesiastical year. Just as in the United States, we have the regular year that people use, and then we have a fiscal year that I think begins in America in October. For whatever reason, it works out better for the government to plan its budget differently than the general calendar. And so we have in the sacred calendar the years counting from autumn to autumn, and that is why the Jubilee year begins in the autumn. The 50th year begins in the autumn, and they were counting year by year from autumn to autumn, but then an ecclesiastical year was established. So now the first month becomes the month of spring, and now the seventh month is when the autumn begins, and the seventh month is when the year changes from year to year, the numbering of the years. But the actual counting of months goes according to spring. Spring is the first month, and that was established in Exodus 12, and to which I've turned. Okay. Now the Eternal spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you." And that was, of course, then he goes on to talk about the Passover of the spring and the days of unleavened bread. So historically speaking, then, the Festival of Trumpets is a memorial of creation. Let's go on then and talk about the 10th day of the seventh month. And the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, this is verse 26, verse 27, "Also the 10th day of this seventh month shall be the Day of Atonement, Yom HaKippurim, expiation." It's like paying a ransom. You do what you have to do to be free of your obligation. Also the 10th day of this seventh month shall be the Day of Atonement. It shall be a holy. It works out well in English. The term in English comes out well, at-one-ment. It also works out well in Spanish, because the Day of Atonement is a time of affliction of your soul, meaning you're going to fast. You're going to afflict your soul. So you're going to have a fast, which in Spanish is ayuno. So let's take the word ayuno and break it up and fudge a little bit, and we have I uno, there is one. So you can make a pun in Spanish, you can make a pun in English. So anyway, also the 10th day of the seventh month shall be the Day of Atonement. It shall be a holy convocation for you. You shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire to the Eternal. Well, we can no longer offer sacrifices, but sacrifices were offered every day. Obviously, there's going to be special sacrifices on holy days, but sacrifices are offered every day. It's certainly possible to keep the Sabbath and the holy days without the sacrificial system. They would have been doing that in the wilderness. They wouldn't have had necessarily sufficient animals to sacrifice all through those 40 years necessarily, at least for everybody to be involved. But in any case, the Jews have been keeping the holy days for nearly 2 millennia without the sacrificial system. Anyway, I want to talk about the Day of Atonement. It's a time of atonement. It's a time when we are reconciled to God. A time of fasting is a time when one feels more humble and one can be in a more introspective frame of mind. We're ready to listen when we haven't eaten. And in effect, as I said, it's a way of getting back on track spiritually. And the Day of Atonement has special rituals in Leviticus 16 in order to atone for, in order to completely rectify the relationship of Israel to God. And you could look it up in Leviticus 16. And this pictures in the history of God's people the fact that God's people often provoked him so badly, and had he not been the God of mercy, he could have just wiped them out. But he didn't. And in Exodus 34, in Exodus 32, for example, after the golden calf episode, verse 14 of Exodus 32, so the Eternal relented from the harm which he said he would do to his people. He relented, so there was a reconciliation. And then Moses, who had broken the 10 Commandments in anger, well, later on you'll see that, he went down there and broke the tablets. He went back to God, and God gave him a new set of the 10 Commandments, the same commandments, but a new set of the 10 Commandments. And so Moses came back to the children of Israel, and the covenant was renewed. And it is Jewish tradition that this occurred on the Day of Atonement. And if you go to the book of Numbers, you'll find that once again the children of Israel were so rebellious and disrespectful and ungrateful that once again God could have wiped them out. But once again he didn't. Moses interceded as he did in Exodus 32. Excuse me, and he's a type of Jesus Christ who intercedes for us. And in Numbers 40, verse 20, God says, "Then the Eternal said, I have pardoned according to your word." Salachti kidvarecha. Jews repeat that often during the Autumn Festival season. So we have the Day of Atonement picturing the fact that Israel sins but is reconciled to God. And God continues to have a relationship with the people of Israel all through history, very patiently. He punishes, but he doesn't totally, rid himself of them. And so there is that relationship of Israel to God that continues to this day and will continue from here on out. Then we go to the Festival of Tabernacles, and it's very clear why we have the Festival of Tabernacles. And I won't read the commandment, but I will go on and I'll read the way the commandment is worded here in Leviticus 23 and verse 41. This, of course, it occurs at full moon of the 7th month. We're now on the 15th day of the 7th month. In the procession here of festivals. You shall keep it as a feast to the Eternal for 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month. You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All who are native Israelites shall dwell in booths. And these booths are not defined here. It's a temporary dwelling. Later on in Hosea, the 12th chapter, we see the term tents used. So it's a matter of being in a temporary dwelling. And in the New Testament, when Jesus Christ kept this festival, no specifics are given about what type of residence he had during that period of time. But he wasn't a temporary residence because he wasn't home. He had left Nazareth and gone to Jerusalem to keep that festival. Anyway, I want to go to verse 43. That your generations may know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the eternal your God. So we remember that there was a transition period. When Israel came out of Egypt, there was a wilderness journey, and a lot of lessons to be learned from that wilderness journey that we can apply in our own Christian lives. So again, there's a historical background to that festival that really is part of church history. It's not just Jewish history, it's church history. Now there's another day, without taking time, because our time is short right now, there's an 8th day of sacred assembly, Shemini Atzeret. There's an 8th day that's tacked onto the Festival of Tabernacles that is a festival in its own right. And you could think of that festival as picturing the final rest. Israel's wandering in the wilderness, and then Israel enters the promised land. And upon entering the promised land, Israel dedicated itself to God. Unfortunately, it didn't follow through. But I want to go to Joshua 24. Joshua 24, and I want to go to verse 14. He gathered the people together when they had come into the land, the promised land, Joshua, the one who took over after Moses' death. And in Joshua 14, did I say 20? I should have said 24. I hope I did. Okay, good. Linda's alert on the alert. Okay, so Joshua 24 and verse 14. He says, "Now therefore, fear the Eternal, serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river," the Euphrates River, "and in Egypt. Serve the Eternal. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Eternal, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. We will serve the Eternal, Yahweh, Adonai, Hashem." So, as I said, the Shmini Atzeret, that 8th day of sacred assembly, would picture Israel in the promised land and dedicated to God, as it should have, at least it should have been. So that's some historical background to these festivals, and there's so much there, so rich in lessons. But that's an overview. And now I want to talk about the hero of the holy days, Jesus Christ. We understand the Festival of Trumpets pictures that final trumpeting, the final trumpets that you read about in the book of Revelation, the 7 trumpets, picturing the day of the Lord. So the Festival of Trumpets pictures the day of the Lord. You know the principle in the Bible of a day for a year. The day of the Lord initially will last a year, and it will consist of various judgments that will come upon rebellious human beings, human civilization contrary to God. One plague will follow another and will follow another, and it will go on for quite some time. I want to go to Revelation, the 8th chapter. And when you read about the trumpets there, you read about one plague after another, and the trumpets are sounding. And finally we come to the 5th plague, which is the first of 3 woes. And notice in that 5th plague, I should be in Revelation 9. Did I say 8? It starts in Revelation 8, and then it goes on into Revelation 9. And I want to go to that 5th plague, because let's say the first 4 plagues last a couple of weeks each. And let's say it begins with the Festival of Trumpets. So now we have 4 trumpets have sounded, and maybe each plague, let's say, lasts 2 weeks. So now we're going from mid-September to mid-November. But then we have a problem that people are in verse 10, there's a pain that comes upon them that lasts for 5 months. I'm reading now Revelation 9:10, talking about these locusts that are pictured earlier. They had tails like scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. Their power was to hurt men 5 months. All right, so now let's go 5 months from mid-November. We come to mid-April. This is the time of the Festival of Unleavened Bread. And at that time, the Jews are looking for Elijah the prophet to tell them the Messiah is coming. And that year, I believe it will happen. That during the days of unleavened bread, the two witnesses will announce the fact that Jesus Christ is about to return. He will return that year. We don't know when. You don't know, and I don't know. We're not supposed to know when, but it'll be sometime that year, after I believe the Festival of Unleavened Bread. So that's something about the Festival of Trumpets in terms of Jesus Christ as our coming King. Pictured in the Festival of Trumpets. He's our coming King. But in the meantime, before coming as King, we know he came as a humble carpenter's son, as a rabbi, and as a sacrificial lamb, which we understand from the Spring Festival days. So we understand that he tabernacled among us. God tabernacled with human beings. And so the Festival of Tabernacles, which comes, well, first, before we come to that, I skipped the Day of Atonement. And I want to talk about the Day of Atonement and the fact that if you read Leviticus 16, who is the hero of the Day of Atonement? The high priest. If you read Jewish literature, who is the hero of the Day of Atonement? The high priest. You read about what he had to do that day. And who is our high priest? Jesus Christ. And what the high priest did on that day pictures the ministry of Jesus Christ. And I go to Hebrews, the 4th chapter, and I want to go to around verse 14 of Hebrews 4. So the Day of Atonement, in terms of Jesus Christ, now pictures Jesus Christ as our high priest. Now there's more to the Day of Atonement, as you know, or will know if you keep listening to me. But I wanted to focus today, right now, on Jesus Christ and the Day of Atonement. Hebrews 4:14. Seeing then that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. And so therefore, as the ancient high priest could do, we can do even in a greater way, in a heavenly way. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need, through Jesus Christ. Okay, now we come to the Festival of Tabernacles, and John 1 tells us, if you look at the Greek there, John 1:14, that Jesus tabernacled among us. The Word of God, the Logos, became Jesus the Christ. So we have God tabernacling with people, and so Jesus' human ministry is pictured in the Festival of Tabernacles. He was very likely born on the first day of Festival of Tabernacles and circumcised on the 8th day of Sacred Assembly. I'm saying possibly. And now we have the 8th day of Sacred Assembly. And the 8th day of Sacred Assembly pictures that final tabernacling of God with human beings, the New Jerusalem. We've had God tabernacling with us in the person of Jesus Christ, and for that matter, he will do so again during the millennium. Jesus Christ will be here in a more intense way as a spirit being. He'll be tabernacling with human beings in the millennium. But then we finally have Revelation 21, and I think that the 8th day of Sacred Assembly brings that out, the ultimate future of human beings, the New Jerusalem. Let's go to Revelation 21. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. You know, my teacher, who's now dead, I learned a lot of what I know from an evangelist who was also a historian and a Bible scholar. He's been dead for quite some time, but he was married on the 8th day of Sacred Assembly. It just comes to mind as I'm reading this. Number 3, and I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. So I think that 8th day pictures that final tabernacling of God with men, which is for eternity. So it's beyond the Festival of Tabernacles now. Now we're talking about not 1,000 years, or not the human ministry of Jesus Christ. We're talking now about eternity. And the relationship we're going to have with God our Father which of course begins with the relationship we have with God our Father through our elder brother, spiritually speaking, Jesus Christ. And from another point of view, we are the bride. Jesus Christ is the bridegroom who will come and consummate the marriage at his return. So here we see significance of these appointed times from a historical point of view and from the point of view of the ministry of Jesus Christ. And I've given you kind of a survey, and obviously in days to come, as we come closer to these days and as we keep these days, hopefully these lessons can be brought out, and you'll be hearing, I would hope and pray, if you go to various assemblies and hear instruction, you'll be hearing instruction along these lines and along also the prophetic lines that I didn't cover today. There's still time to cover the prophecies, if I'm alive and well, over these weeks and ahead, and when we come to that festival season, to cover the prophetic significance. I do want to go now to the Colossians, the second chapter, in conclusion. You wondered if I would ever conclude. So let's go to Colossians 2, and let's understand that as we keep these holy days, we don't want to do so in a judgmental fashion, in a Pharisaic fashion. We want to allow for maybe certain gray areas that come up, and not be fanatical, but these days should be kept. But when you're keeping these days, in Colossae, people valued being ascetic and doing without. No, God wants us to enjoy life. You have alcohol in moderation. You don't get drunk. No intoxication. Alcohol, yes. Intoxication, no. And the same thing with the other things that we can enjoy. We enjoy them in balance. And so the people in Colossae were told, don't let people condemn you because you're enjoying these festivals. So let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths. And the new moons are not commanded days of rest, but we do take note of the new moon each month if we're keeping up with God's calendar, which I hope you are. And of course, the Festival of Trumpets occurs on the new moon of the 7th month, so the new moon is obviously something we take note of. And if some people want to celebrate it more in a more special way, go ahead, have at it. That's fine. Anyway, so let no one judge you in food or in drink or regarding a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come. We don't function without a shadow, but the shadow is a reflection of us, or it's not us. You can maybe see ahead sometimes somebody's shadow and know that person is coming, but the shadow is not the person, but still the shadow is there. The shadow is not separated from the person. It's not like the Walt Disney's Peter Pan, where he loses his shadow and he has to come get it, if you know that story. So we each of us has a shadow, and it's part of what we are, but it's not us. We are who we are, and the shadow shows you, ahead of time that we're on our way, let's say, or it might be sometimes something that you see indicating we were somewhere. That's another thing. But anyway, in verse 17, or let's go to 16, 18, without interrupting myself, I will read these two verses. So let no one judge you in food or in drink or regarding a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Christ. So he is the hero of the holy days. And as we keep these holy days from year to year, as Christian commandment keepers, in the generic sense of that term, whatever your particular community may label itself, hopefully within wise guidelines from the Bible. When we keep these appointed times, we keep in mind that at the center of attention is Jesus Christ and God's plan of salvation. As I said, what the Germans call Heilsgeschichte. There is a plan of salvation being worked out here in the holy days, and I can get into that more when I get into the prophetic aspect. So as Christian commandment keepers, we're going to be keeping these autumn festivals as they come around, and I hope that this preview has excited you a bit to look forward to that time and the various lessons that we can learn by observing those days. All the best to you and yours.